Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you for joining us for this virtual seminar, which is the latest seminar in the CGIAR Policy Seminar Series on Strengthening Food Systems Resilience, supported by BMZ, which is Germany's Federal Ministry for Economic and Development Cooperation. My name is Charlotte Hebebrand, and on behalf of IFPRI's Director General, Johan Swinnen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this seminar. We're very pleased to co-organize today's seminar with our fellow CGIAR centers from the Alliance of CIAT and Biodiversity, as well as another alliance of two CG centers, CIFOR and World Agroforestry. We all know, of course, that sustainability is an important attribute of resilient food systems, and curbing deforestation is a major topic for those grappling with making food systems more sustainable. Today's event looks at the European Union's regulation on deforestation-free products, which aims to reduce global deforestation by ensuring key commodities often linked to deforestation cannot be placed on the EU market. Speakers will examine the rationale for and approach of the EUDR, examine how it relates to national policies and frameworks, and look in particular at how best to ensure that smallholders can be aligned with the EUDR. We have a really fantastic and quite busy speaker lineup, and I would like to say a very warm welcome to Lisa Kirfel-Rühle, who's the Deputy Head of the Agriculture and Rural Development Division in BMZ, as well as Simon Gmeiner from the European Commission's Director General for International Cooperation. We're also very honored to have with us His Excellency Andri Hadi, who serves as Indonesia's ambassador to the EU since 2020, and a stellar lineup of other policy and research leaders from across the world. It's now my pleasure to turn over to you, Lisa, to walk us through the rationale and scope of this important regulation.
Yes, thanks so much, Charlotte. I'm happy to be here, even if it's online. It would be much more interesting to see all of you. I think science has a big role to play here, to picture what lies before us. That we really have to protect forests. It's really a matter of urgency. So, dear Johan Swinnen, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to welcome you to another seminar in this series of very successful gatherings on strengthening food systems resilience. But it's the first time I attend to, I have to admit. Exchanging between policy and science and evaluating research branches is particularly important for BMZ. It builds the basis of evidence-based policymaking, and we need that so much. Today, I'm very happy to address a key topic, our forests and their preservation through policies, and particularly the EU deforestation regulation. Recent studies underscore this urgency. Over the last 24 years, deforestation for permanent agriculture has been the single largest driver of tropical primary forest loss. And also the latest EAT Lancet report, which was launched recently, clearly expresses the need to feed humanity on existing agricultural land by implementing a zero expansion policy of new agricultural land into natural ecosystems and species-rich forests. This from the EAT Lancet report, which is something people look at and acknowledge. As the world's second largest importer of agricultural commodities, the European Union recognizes its global responsibility to drive change in how these products are produced, sourced, and traded. And in order to live up to this responsibility, the Commission has adopted the EU deforestation regulation in June 2023. Yeah, this is 2 years ago now. This regulation marks a landmark step in global efforts to halt deforestation and forest degradation driven by agricultural commodity production worldwide. With the EUDR, we ensure that 7 key commodities and major deforestation drivers, cattle, cocoa, coffee, palm oil, soy, rubber, and wood, and derived products placed on the EU market are not linked to deforestation or forest degradation. Companies placing these products on the EU market will need to demonstrate that these are deforestation-free, legally produced, and traceable. This includes collecting geolocation data on the plot of production, collecting information on production and the value chain, and following a risk assessment. If applicable, companies are asked to carry out risk mitigation measures, and finally submit a due diligence statement before placing the product on the market. As BMZ, we are particularly happy about Article 30, cooperation with third countries. Article 30 is the first of its kind in EU law, or foresees close cooperation between the EU Commission and EU member states with partner countries, and to support them to prepare for the EUDR. And I'm happy that our colleagues from the EUCOM will share more details on this later on. The EUDR is scheduled to entry into application for 30th of December this year. But, however, on the 23rd of September, EU Commissioner Roswell, however, explained that there are technical concerns regarding the EU information system. She announced in a letter to the European Parliament and the Environment Council of EU member states that the Director General of Environment considers delaying the entry into application of the EUDR by yet another year. At this stage, I cannot say more on the political developments. Maybe only we are closely monitoring the developments coming in the coming days or weeks. And I would, however, like to underline that BMZ fully supports the EUDR. We have invested a lot, and we see it as a milestone for people, forests, and climate. And to give you an impression what we have done, in line with Article 30, we are supporting our partner countries, especially smallholders and supply chain actors, in preparation for the EUDR. Several partner countries and companies have significantly invested in the preparation of the EUDR as well. And together with the EU Commission, Simon Gmeiner is here today, and our partners from the Netherlands, France, and Italy, we have launched the Team Europe initiative on deforestation-free value chains, where we particularly focus on the support of smallholder farmers to the transition to deforestation-free and legal production. The current budget is of 68.5 million euro. And one key pillar of this Team Europe initiative is the project Sustainable Agriculture for Forest Ecosystems, SAFE, where we support 10 partner countries with the implementation of the EUDR. And activities include trainings and collecting geolocation data and deforestation-free production with smallholder farmers. We also support the development of national traceability systems and digital public infrastructure that is accessible to all, ensuring that the systems are compatible with each other. Interoperability, this is a famous term in the world of agriculture value chains. So we are very pleased to collaborate closely with CIFOR-ICRAF in several partner countries. We, for example, jointly help successful EUDR trainings in Ecuador, Brazil, and Indonesia for stakeholders supporting smallholders in achieving EUDR alignment while considering gender and intersectional aspects. And on a policy level, we foster multi-stakeholder dialogue and regional exchanges, supporting our partner countries to implement favorable political and legal framework conditions, supporting the implementation of the EUDR. With that, I hope you have gained a first impression on how BMZ supports the transition towards deforestation and conversion-free value chains, and the EUDR as one of the most ambitious tools to achieve them. And to explain about the whole Green Deal approach is that we hoped and still can hope maybe a bit that the CSDDD, the Corporate Social Due Diligence Directive, works complementary with the EUDR, addressing even more social and human rights issues and other environmental issues. So we hope that in the end we finally will have a package which in a way will be effective. So thank you very much for that. I'm looking forward to a fruitful exchange and some learnings for me. Handing back to you, Charlotte.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa, for outlining the, as you say, quite ambitious EUDR, and also outlining the important ways in which the EU is working with partner countries to help them be ready for the EUDR. And Simon is going to get to the Team Europe initiative in a little bit. But first, we're going to hear from a fellow CGIAR colleague. Beria Leimona is a theme leader for climate change, energy, and low carbon development at CIFOR-ICRAF. And thanks for being with us, Beria. You're going to give us a little bit of an overview of deforestation trends and outlooks, and maybe your thoughts on what are some of the key considerations that are rising out of this particular regulation. Over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Greetings to everyone, whenever you're joining from. And thank you for the organizer for the opportunity to be part of this important discussion. My name is Beria Leimona. I am speaking on behalf of CIFOR-ICRAF. This presentation draws from a position paper on the EUDR contributed by CIFOR-ICRAF scientists working across the tropical forest landscape globally. My hope is that this talk helps to set the scene, as Charlotte mentioned, for the today's presentations and discussions, and especially by exploring what it takes to make EUDR more effective, fair, and implementable. Next slide, please. So let's begin with the broader picture. From this slide, you can see despite many high-level commitments, but tropical deforestation remains a major global concern. Let me just cite some number here. In 2023 alone, we lost about 3.7 million hectares of tropical primary forests, which led to about 2.4 gigatons of CO2 emissions, almost half of the EU's entire annual output. And as you know, the main drivers mostly are expansion of industrial agriculture, cattle grazing, and conversions to monoculture plantation, such as pulp, wood, and rubber, as well as the oil palm. But here's the catch. Under current FAO definitions, not all this counts as deforestation. Much of it is technically classified as degradation, not conversion. And this is one of many nuances of the EUDR that must navigate carefully. Next slide, please. Now let's analyze the EUDR using the first lens, salience. Is the EUDR addressing what matters most? On the other hand, EUDR aligns strongly with the public and institutional concern in Europe on deforestation, climate, and biodiversity, as mentioned by our BMZ colleagues in the beginning. It brings in tools like digital traceability and geolocations, which are powerful governance in innovation for sure. But on the other hand, it struggles to reflect the realities on the ground, especially for smallholder farmers and in our relevant to our institutional topics, agroforestry system. The forest and non-forest binary used in compliance definitions does not match the mosaic, the multifunctional landscape where many of these crops are grown. So while the EUDR is globally relevant, it risks losing local meaning if these nuances are not really addressed. Next slide, please. Let's move to the second lens, the credibility. Here we are asking whether the policy is scientifically grounded and whether the tools it uses are technically fit for purpose. There's a strong foundation. The EUDR builds on years of EU policy learning, as we know, especially the EUDR and FLAGT. So some of them benefited from scientific inputs and institutional learning. But there are also something that we need to consider. Like, for example, the EU GRC 2020 forest map have documented about 80% commission error and 8% omission errors. In some countries, like Indonesia, the disagreement with national data is nearly 27%. And in this case, agroforestry system, where the most smallholder operate are particularly vulnerable to misclassification. And over-reliance of satellite-derived data without ground truthing or local evidence can further weaken the trust on the information. So yes, the intent is credible, but the instruments may need some strengthening, especially when smallholder and agroforest system are to be fairly included. The next slide, please. Finally, let's talk about the legitimacy. That is, do people see EUDR as fair, inclusive, and procedurally just? Yeah. So the EU policymaking process was relatively open, for sure. That's a very good initiative, welcoming input from NGOs, businesses, and even non-EU voices. There was no single institution dominating, as we can see from several studies and review. Their commissions set the baseline, parliaments push the ambitions, and the council shape the implementation. However, inclusion will not just about who gets a seat at the table, right? It's all about whose the realities are reflected in the rules. Right now, again, we would like to emphasize that I would say that in the next presentation, there will be some topics similar to our concern is about the exclusion risk, yeah? So there is a lack of grounded expertise in due diligence check, for example. In addition to that, unclear definitions like counts what as deforestation-free leaves space for confusion and even some debates. So in short, without clearer rules and fairer risk sharing, legitimacy gaps will widen. So my last slide, it's about the next slide, please. So now we are coming to the key messages. And how can we move forward constructively? There are 5 points that I would like to summarize here. First one, for sure, that we need to recognize farming practices, especially the smallholder farming practices, including agroforest system as legitimate and sustainable forms of land use. That means expanding the definition used in compliance of the framework. Second, we may need to align more closely with procedural country data and system to make due diligence both more credible and more practical. The third one, reduce the compliance asymmetries for sure, supporting the smallholders, targeted tools, finance, and policy safeguards are really important here. And then the fourth one, build synergies, yeah, that will be one of the keywords, between the EUDR and existing voluntary standard like FSC, RSPO, and other national accredited assurance system for sustainable commodity. And finally, we may want to ensure that a landscape level view, the jurisdiction's approach, include non-forest ecosystem, recognize mosaic multifunctionality of landscape, and also avoiding pushing deforestation elsewhere. As the closing message, yeah, we truly believe that EUDR must evolve into a system that is not only technically sound, but also socially inclusive and institutionally aligned with the local realities. That would be the fact. Okay, that's from us, from CIFOR-ICRAF, and I look forward to the discussion ahead. Thank you. Over to you, Charlotte.
Great, thank you very much, Beria. Really important, I think, to have that analysis from the two centers, the forestry centers within the CGIAR. Simon, the floor is yours. Simon has been working on this Team Europe initiative, and he's a policy officer with the Director General for International Partnerships within the European Commission. Thanks so much for outlining that important initiative.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks for the previous speakers who have really outlined some of the main issues that we still have also in partner countries concerning the risk of exclusion of smallholders, which is, of course, one of the risks we're trying to tackle with the Team Europe initiative. Can you switch to the next slide, please? So, as was already mentioned by Lisa Kirfel-Rühle from BMZ, this Team Europe initiative was launched almost 2 years ago at COP28 in December 2023 with an initial financing package of 70 million, which basically pooled funding from the European Commission, France, Germany, Netherlands, and now more recently we have also Italy and other member states on board who are providing new funding, but in some cases also pre-existing projects that can then be further coordinated under this common framework of the Team Europe initiative. So at the beginning, we had a portfolio of 70 million euros in targeted funding, and now we have been able to scale up to 86 million euros. So the Team Europe initiative has been growing consistently since the launch, and we also hope that further member states will continue to come on board and support this important initiative. Next slide, please. So it was already mentioned by Lisa Kirfel-Rühle. We agree from DG INPA side that EUDR has basically breached new ground through including this Article 30 on cooperation with partner countries, because of course it was clear from the beginning that although the regulation applies to EU companies, to operators and traders of the commodities covered under the regulation, it has, of course, direct effects or indirect effects on producing countries, so third countries outside of the EU. And given that the DG for International Partnerships is responsible for the development, cooperation, and partnerships with countries in the Global South primarily, DG INPA has also taken up this role of convening the member states under this Team Europe approach to support producing countries to prepare for EUDR entry into application. So with this Team Europe approach, the goal is and was to contribute to this Article 30 on the EUDR, a comprehensive strategic framework for cooperation with partner countries. This, of course, also includes many actions and discussions that are led by DG Environment, who are responsible for the regulation as such. So they are also engaged in dialogues with partner countries, including, for example, Brazil and Indonesia, on issues such as the country benchmarking and other topics related to smallholder inclusion, for example. In addition to this contribution to Article 30, the focus of this initiative is, of course, as I mentioned already, on the Global South. And we seek to address challenges in all the commodity supply chains that are covered under the EUDR. You know, the 7 commodities. I don't have to list them again, but the focus is on the agricultural commodities, whereas our sister unit, F2 in DG INPA, deals more with the forestry sector, so more from a conservation perspective, but also with regards to timber. And then in addition to this, we want to facilitate, of course, an inclusive transition to deforestation-free and legal supply chains to the EU. So the focus is really on this word inclusive. This is basically to say that the focus will be on the weaker links in the supply chain and is being put on the weaker links in the supply chain. So in particular, smallholder farmers. We try to cover, as I said, all the commodities covered under EUDR, but the focus of our programs is more on those value chains which are predominantly characterized by smallholder production, and this includes, of course, cocoa, coffee, natural rubber, but also palm oil in some cases. And even in the beef sector, we work with small-scale family farmers in Brazil, for example. Last but not least, the TI also seeks to coordinate pre-existing initiatives with these targeted programs that have been put in place with the financing that I mentioned under the TEI, and basically broaden the coordination and the coherence between financing from the Commission and from member states. Next slide, please. And just to give you an idea, maybe some of you have already seen the structure of the TEI is as follows. So the strategic guidance and the directions are being determined by the EU together with member states in the TEI steering committee. The next one will actually happen tomorrow. So maybe I think Lisa will be there from BMZ side for sure. Then we have put into place a so-called Zero Deforestation Hub, which is kind of, on the one hand, a secretariat for the Team Europe initiative, but also carries out outreach functions and coordination functions between the different projects. And then we have two main programs, which are basically the two most important implementation pillars of the Team Europe initiative. On the one hand, the SAFE program, which is implemented by GIZ. SAFE stands for Sustainable Agriculture for Forest Ecosystems, where we have this long-term support approach with projects now in 10 countries. We started out with a list of 4 countries, and now we're in 10 countries covering all the 3 main regions, of course, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia. And in addition, about 1.5 years ago, we launched an additional instrument, the facility on deforestation-free value chains, which is a bit more flexible and which can provide technical assistance on demand. So upon request from our partner countries, through our EU delegations, we are able to provide analysis and technical support here. And I think this is also where many people here on this call who are dealing with more the analysis scientific side, I think would be good to link up on the technical side there. And then last but not least, everything builds on a broader portfolio of relevant projects which are financed by EU and member states, which we do not steer directly here from INTPA, from our unit, but where we are coordinating very, very closely, and in particular at country level. So Alinvest Verde, for example, is active in Latin America. Then we have the EU Sustainable Cocoa Initiative, which actually predates EUDR, which is active in West Africa and the cocoa sector, and many other regional programs and bilateral support activities, which are coordinated with the programs that we put into place under the TI. I think this is already the last slide.
We'll need to stop there, Simon.
Yeah, thank you so much for the attention, and happy to take your questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Simon. Really comprehensive overview of what's really a very large effort. So thank you for that. I forgot to mention, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the seminar. So please do submit your questions on whatever platform you're joining us on. We'll know we'll have a very lively discussion. We're now moving into a second part of the seminar where we're taking sort of a national lens here. So we're going to hear from Indonesia, from Malaysia, and then we'll have 2 speakers, colleagues from IFPRI, who are speaking about considerations for Mercosur countries, and then also looking at the China-Brazil initiative on deforestation, which is rather different from the EUDR. So our first speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce His Excellency Andri Hadi, who's the ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to the European Union since 2020. And in that role, he has actually played a quite active role, I believe, in the discussions with the EU on this important regulation. And just to mention that he was previously posted all over the world, including Singapore and Washington. Thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador. The floor is yours. But we do not hear you.
Hello.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, Charlotte and everyone. Please allow me to start by thanking CGR, BMZ, and then the moderator, Ms. Charlotte of IFPRI. It is a pleasure to be here and to share Indonesia experience in engaging with the EU on the EUDR. From the beginning, Indonesia has recognized the EUDR as well-intentioned initiative. We share the EU goals of protecting forests and promoting sustainable trade. At the same time, we remain concerned that its one-size-fits-all approach could cause unintended trade disruption. For Indonesia, the challenges are very real. Over 2.6 million smallholder farmers manage 40% of palm oil areas, with million more in rubbers, coffee, and cocoa. Many live in remote area and lack access to GPS devices, digital maps, or capacity to meet complex traceability requirement. Much of Indonesia land is governed by customary rights that do not easily fit the EU legal definition. The global forest monitoring data used by the EU was never verified on the ground. As a result, sustainable agroforestry systems such as coffee or cocoa grown under forest canopies can be misclassified as deforestation. From the start, Indonesia also has viewed the country benchmarking system as complicated and quite unclear. As for us, a single risk label is puzzling. Indonesia has over 17,000 islands with palm oil in Sumatra, Kalimantan, coffee in Lampung and West Java, cocoa in Sulawesi. Which region or crops define our risk? Meanwhile, the debate over the zero risk category has added more confusion, making the process feel more political than practical. The reality that is Indonesia has made remarkable progress. Deforestation has fallen by more than 95% over the past three decades. This downward, confirmed by our national forest monitoring system, Simontana, which use satellite imagery and field verification. The FAO has recognized Simontana as reliable and verifiable. However, under the EUDR, national system like ours are not recognized, allowing older and less accurate data to influence country risk classification unfairly. Indonesia has engaged EU both bilaterally and collectively. Since 2020, together with Brazil, Malaysia, and 11 other like-minded countries, we sent a joint letter outlining concern about benchmarking, traceability, and implementation timelines. When the EUDR was adopted in 2023, Indonesia and 16 other countries submitted another joint letter. In 2004, we joined 17 other countries supporting a postponement while reaffirming a partnership-based approach. Our embassy in Brussels maintained close communication with the EU institution and business association, raising issues on the benchmarking criteria, due diligence obligation, and the treatment of credible national system. We participate in the multi-stakeholder platform, the EUDR dialogue, and then the Indonesia-Malaysia-EU ad hoc joint task force. We have also engaged EU importers and Indonesia exporters, conducting dry run of EUDR due diligence with competent authorities. So Indonesia has already a strong sustainability framework, SFLK for timber under our flag partnership with EU, and Indonesia sustainable palm oil, our mandatory palm oil certification aligned with the international standard. This credible system deserves recognition within the EU EUDR framework. Without flexibility or recognition of national systems, those with the least capacity, the smallholder farmers, will bear the heaviest burden. Indonesia commitment to sustainability is also reflected in the Indonesia-EU Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA. CEPA include chapters on trade and sustainable growth and development, with enforceable provision on the labor and environmental standard in line with Paris Agreement. It also includes a palm oil protocol, providing a constructive platform to address sustainability issue through dialogue and cooperation. We therefore see a possible postponement of the EUDR not as a setback, but as an opportunity. It's a chance to align system, strengthen readiness, and ensure that no producer or farmer is left behind. Each producing country faces unique realities, and one-size-fits-all approach simply will not work. If we can move forward in a way that is inclusive, practical, and cooperative, the EUDR can truly achieve its goal, protecting forests while sustaining livelihood and keeping trade fair and open. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hadi. I think you've teed up a lot of issues there, which I'm sure we will get into during the Q&A discussion period. Next, we're moving to Malaysia. The ambassador mentioned ISPO. Now we're going to hear about the MSPO, which is the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil Certification. It's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Mohd Hasbollah Suparyono, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the MSPO. Over to you, Mohd.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for having me. Good evening from Malaysia. Yeah, so MSPO is one of the key initiative, of course, governing Malaysian palm oil industry in Malaysia. It's already been there since 2016, and actually while we are actually developing MSPO and improving MSPO, we never expect such regulation like EUDR or any other upcoming due diligence regulation coming on board. So whatever we have put up last time, it was actually purely on making the Malaysian palm oil sustainable, verifiable, and credible management and production. So maybe you can proceed to slide number 2. This is this is the only slide I have, only one slide, but I would like to highlight the Malaysia reform for EUDR, which is also covers our regulation and as well as the MSPO certification. So we have strengthened our National Forestry Act 2022 that require public inquiry before any permanent reserve forest degazettement, and we also increase the penalties, fine raised to nearly 1 million and prison terms extended up to 20 years. Why regulation and legal reform is important? Because MSPO built based on the compliance to legal requirement, national legal requirement. So strengthening national legal requirement automatically will dictate Malaysian palm oil industry to also comply to in order to be certified, they need to comply to local regulation. So in terms of enforcement, because Malaysia is very unique, we have a federal and state level of government structure. So we are coordinating through a monitoring committees and joint operation, including satellite and drone monitoring for both federal and state government, where we try to see and investigate any new development or clearing, not only for palm oil, but also any other commodities operating in Malaysia. So in terms of certification, I just want to share that we have actually 3 different certification for our commodities, which is MSPO, of course, Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil, Malaysian Sustainable Natural Rubber, MSNR, and also Malaysian Timber Certification Scheme, of which all of 3 of these certification actually prohibited conversion of natural forest from 2019 or even from 2020, and for MTCC, Malaysian Timber Scheme, under the PEFC framework, which is non-natural forest conversion after 2010, which is actually earlier than the EUDR deforestation cutoff date. Next, please. Right. So in terms of facilitation by the government, we actually provided 2 different incentives. If you can see here, number 4 and number 5. We have incentive for conservation, and also we have incentive for certification and traceability. As I mentioned earlier, that MSPO started 2016. Government intervention was very massive even until now for independent smallholders, and in totality, since 2015 to 2025, covering our system, certification system, standard revision, and also our IT system and national traceability system. The total MSPO ecosystem actually we have incentivized around 38.40 million between 2015 to 2025 euro for Malaysia, and in fact we actually continue our independent smallholders incentive until now. Next, please. You can please click. Yes, and another one, click. And also to share that based on the forest data that we have forest area decline was sharper before 2020, and since then, strengthened governance and policy reform that we have made significantly slowed the rate of loss to annual average of 39,000 hectares, slightly higher than the threshold of the EUDR. And of course, under the Global Forest Watch report confirmed that the downward trend of Malaysian forests recorded 13% decline in primary forest loss compared to 2023. And of course, all of this contributed to the several voluntary national and also mandatory national initiative under MSPO and any other regulations locally. And of course, we are moving very fast now, though it's already though it's a bit delay, but we are moving very fast in terms of preparing our smallholders. We work closely with the European Union through the European Forest Institute as one of our co-collaboration on identifying gaps in the MSPO standards as well as readiness for the independent smallholders. And through the current MSPO standards, we believe that the current system and ecosystem that we have in MSPO will able to be the tool for our Malaysian palm oil industry export to EU and comply to the EUDR due diligence. With that, thank you very much.
Excellent.
Over to you, Charlotte.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mohd, for outlining the MSPO and its relationship with the EUDR. Our next speaker is from IFPRI, Valeria Pinheiro. She serves as the regional representative for Latin America and the Caribbean. And she has just published a paper, actually, that looks at all of the policies and frameworks related to deforestation in the Mercosur region. So over to you, Valeria.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present this work that, as you can see, is being part of the Policy Innovation Program from the CGIAR and with our partners from Embrapa, from the MAPA, from Ministry of Agriculture from Brazil, and also from Bolsa de Cereales of Argentina. So the idea of this project was to look independently at the 4 countries that are members of Mercosur, so it's Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and look at their situation with respect to deforestation from 2020, 2010 till now, and also to be looking at what is the governance that goes behind it, and then to try to combine to get some lessons from those countries in trying to see what are the right interventions to disincentivize deforestation in the region. Next slide, please. So you can see the Mercosur countries have the same kind of disruptors or drivers that will bring deforestation, as it is agricultural expansion, infrastructure development, and land use changes. They all affect these countries, but how these pressures translate into forest outcomes varies widely. And this is the things that we would like to try to highlight in this report. So, for example, the alignment between state capacity, political commitment, and institutional coordination were the ones that really found to be key in this. Some countries like Uruguay have maintained consistent forest policies for decades under a centralized authority. Others instead, such as Argentina, operate under a federated governance where forest outcomes vary according to provincial level decisions making and differences in implementation capacity. The presence of advanced monitoring tools does not guarantee forest protection, like Brazil's advanced systems have proven effective, yet their impact has diminished during periods of reduced political commitment or weakened enforcement. And in Paraguay, the legal clarity in the east part of the country really contrasts with the institutional gaps in the west, showing that also international divergence can be just as critical between countries and inside the country. Next slide. And then moving a little bit to the shared challenges in forest governance again. Again, we see agricultural expansion, particularly for soy and beef, remains the dominant driver of deforestation, affecting critical ecosystems in the Gran Chaco and the Amazon. While strong legal frameworks exist, enforcement is uneven due to institutional fragmentation and political pressures. Local governments often lack the capacity to implement regulations or process land use plans, especially in decentralized systems. The issue of smallholders also face barriers accessing conservation incentives, and that it is something seen in the 4 countries, and it shows us one of the key lessons here. And the monitoring infrastructure also varies widely. Brazil and Argentina have advanced early warning systems, but Paraguay relies on periodic mapping, and Uruguay lacks a real-time system. The other thing is forest definitions and mapping criteria differ across the countries, which complicates regional data harmonization and undermines credibility in international reporting. And then last, forestry for industrial use is economically significant in the 4 countries, however, particularly in Brazil and Uruguay. But only Uruguay maintains a digital public forest inventory, highlighting again the regional gaps in data transparency and monitoring capacity. Next slide. And then just comparing or looking at the 4 countries in just one table, and again, just picking some of the things there are in these reports, we can see that Brazil combines legal reserves, satellite-based enforcement, and supply chain measures. Examples are like the soy moratorium, with the forest code and registry, producing a comprehensive but complex governance system. Uruguay has maintained a strict conservation model since 1987, with tight regulation on native forest use, robust property level management plans, and innovative financial alignment to the KPI linked sovereign bonds. Paraguay demonstrates a dual regime, total provision in the eastern region and regulated deforestation in the western Chaco. And there's also an institutional overlap between the INFONA and the MARES, which they are from there, that hinder coherent implementation. And then Argentina employs a decentralized zoning model, leading to heterogeneous application of forest categories across provinces and variable results in forest loss containment. And last slide. And then here, just to highlight some of the lessons learned or things that we observe in the 4 countries that may serve again as ideas on how to create these right incentives for producers and for the whole governance systems to really move forward these interventions that will somehow disincentivize the deforestation. We can see that legal prohibitions alone are not sufficient to reduce deforestation, particularly in frontier areas with weak oversight or powerful economic incentives for land clearing. Second one is monitoring and transparency matter, but most be paired with actions. Brazil's satellite system proved effective when linked to enforcement and policy response. Third, decentralization requires a strong coordination and resources. Otherwise, subnational entities cannot deliver forest protection effectively, as seen in Argentina and Paraguay. And then Uruguay offers a promising model. Its key performance indicator, or the KPI, links sovereign bonds, aligns national fiscal objectives with forest conservation, creating a replicable financial mechanism. And then here, the main lesson is to achieve lasting reduction in legal and illegal deforestation, Mercosur countries must design an effective, scalable economic incentives that reward forest stewardship, increase the opportunity cost of deforestation, and mobilize private sector participation in sustainable land use. And just to end, we just like to highlight that these divergent models show that legal architecture must be supported by functional institutions, transparent data, and stakeholder buy-in to be effective. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you, Valeria, for that very comprehensive overview of how the different Mercosur countries are putting laws into place and also looking at the broader issues that are required in addition to having the laws on the books. We're now going to turn to China, which is also a really, really interesting story because, of course, China, as we all know, I think, is a huge importer of soybeans, and many of them are coming from Brazil. And there is also concern in China about curbing deforestation cost through its own imports. So it's my pleasure to introduce Kevin Chen, who's a senior research fellow with IFPRI and heads our office in Beijing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Charlotte. It's great to be here to learn a bit more on the EUDR and its implications. And let me mention that China certainly is probably one of the few countries in domestic sense its forest coverage has been increased over time significantly. And it also joined a global drive to reduce the deforestation. And the concern certainly comes in when China started to import significant amount of beef and soybean from Brazil, for example. So let's to the next slides, please. So if you look at the figure in the second bottom figure, which really show that Brazil is dominant supply of the soybean to China. It reached about 80 million metric tons. So the number is significant. And China actually imported, it's about 85% of its soybeans. And so largely it's come from Brazil. And Brazil certainly has a so-called Soil China initiative, so which certainly help the Brazil soybean into the China's market. And they're also associated, for example, the US biofuel policy and also reduce the US soy export to China. That means it will increase China's imports, soy imports from Brazil. So there are many dynamic reasons behind the big surge of the soy imports, China's soy imports from Brazil's. And certainly with the significant increase of soil and also beef at the same time, that's caused some of concerns regarding it may increase the deforest risk. Next slide, please. So with that, certainly I like to highlight a few things. What did China do? And China certainly joined the international agreement to the efforts to reduce deforestation. And one of the initiatives which are carried out by the China's state company called CAFCO, which is the largest importing company in China. They set up the zero deforestation strategy and made a commitment to the sustainability and to promote the integrated crop, livestock, forestry system to increase land productivity and to use the satellite monitoring and traceability tool to supply chain transparency, try to ensure the compliance with the zero deforestation standards. And they also partner with the Brazil Green Passport Program for certification of sustainable beef, in particular, for example. So this is certainly a clear demonstration that a company from China certainly is very serious in terms of carry out the zero deforestation strategy and actions. Next slide, please. And with the government, and if I'm talking about 10 years ago, nobody really talked about zero deforestation. And this is a very sensitive issue, but this kind of debate has been changed in the recent year. So government now is working with a number of the partners with the international organization, with NGOs to do the study on developing the guideline for China-Brazil commodity value chain with the objective to address the deforestation risk. And I'm not going to go to the detail, For example, some of the key actions is sustainable procurement standard and try to introduce and strengthen the traceability, and also to strengthening the cross-department collaboration. Because when you work with the Ministry of Environment or Ministry of Agriculture, and you need a close coordination to make things work. And they also look particularly at the green finance area and to try to find the green finance tool to support the sustainable agricultural practice in Brazil. Yeah, next slides, please. And the World Economic Forum China, which held in Tianjin, and they typically hold the brainstorm session and try to ensure the supply chain transparency, to help introduce the traceability, to ensure the beef and soybean products are sourced from deforestation-free area in Brazil. So when we look at the trace data, for example, the source of soybean imported into China, 75% are really from the non-deforestation areas. And then the challenge is when with the EUDR and people starting ask the question, what will happen if EUDR in place, where some substitution effect occur? Because EUDR try to reduce the deforestation, right, globally. But however, if it's only happen, for example, EUDR is enforced, and China may put in the position to import more soils from deforestation areas. So overall, it may reduce the level of the deforestation that will be reduced, will become insignificant if the substitution effect is large enough, right? So that means when we look at the implication of the implementation of EUDR, we have to pay attention to this kind of potential substitution effect. So how large that is the research we're currently doing. So let me conclude my presentation right here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was an important point to raise there at the end. And again, I expect we'll get into that more in the Q&A. Please do keep your questions coming in the meantime. So we're now entering the last session of this seminar, where we will focus in particular on smallholders, looking at inclusive pathways for smallholders in deforestation-free supply. And it's my great pleasure now to introduce Izana Saleh, who is the Secretary General of CIFOR-ICRAF, which stands for Council of Palm Oil Producing Countries. It's a intergovernmental organization working on all kinds of palm oil issues. And Izana has held various positions in the public service, private sector, and global nonprofit leadership. And it's my great pleasure that you're with us today, Izana. The floor is yours.
The pleasure's all mine, Charlotte. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes.
Great. Very quick thank you to CGIAR, IFPRI, and also all the amazing speakers that have presented and will be continuing to present. It's extremely timely of a conversation. And, you know, while EUDR is an important step for global sustainability, I think a lot of what we're emphasizing is that the implementation must be both environmentally sound as well as socially inclusive, which is more this part of the conversation. I'm here on behalf of the Council of Palm Oil Producing Countries. We represent 5 member countries and 3 observer countries. Our members are Indonesia, Malaysia, Honduras, Papua New Guinea, and Democratic Republic of Congo. And our observers are Ghana, Nigeria, and Colombia. So when I speak today, I do represent all the different smallholders in our different countries. And our main message that I hope to bring today is that we must be inclusive. Sustainability must be inclusive. Otherwise, it may just fail at the scale. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we would like to highlight is that the smallholders are not marginal players. They're actually, as far as we're concerned, they're key actors in the global commodity supply chain. But their capacity to comply with the new regulations is actually very different, of course, from that of multinationals. In terms of scope of impact, we've got about 3.6 million smallholders in our member countries, the 5 that I mentioned earlier, and they depend on palm oil for their livelihoods. These countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Honduras, PNG, and Congo, they rely heavily on smallholders for the supply of fresh fruit bunches to processing mills. And many of the smallholders, they work on very small plots in comparison, of course, typically between 5 to 20 hectares. And they face challenges such as informal land tenure, limited digital access, as we'd assume, and also weak market power. And so what we're looking at is that the large producers can comply, can meet the EUDR requirements using advanced legal, technological, and also compliance tools. But in contrast, our smallholders, they lack land titles. Ambassador mentioned that earlier. Digital literacy, which is, I think, a problem across the board, various industries. And also, of course, the funds to invest in such a big, important compliance systems. So the risk that we have is that this regulation, unless we can possibly adapt it, could result in millions being excluded from the market. And EUDR, we know it's not an intention to become a tool of exclusion, but it really must serve as a catalyst for rural development. This is their rice bowl, essentially. Next slide, please. So I want to just highlight on a very high level 4 main compliance barriers that the smallholders face. Firstly is the traceability and geolocation conversation. The EUDR requires digital maps for every farm plot, and the smallholders are facing high costs for the GPS-based mapping. And weak internet connectivity really affects the data uploads. Second is land legality, where many farmers cultivate land passed down through generations, but there's no official titles. And in some cases, the land belongs to the community, or again, as Ambassador mentioned earlier, it's governed by customary rights. And the regulation asks for proof of palm oil. It's grown legally, but the definitions of legal really varies across jurisdiction. There was a presentation earlier that speaks about all the different countries that deploy very differently. And so without national land reform progress, this requirement becomes compliance dead end for the smallholders. Third is the cost of due diligence. The regulation introduces a whole new layer of compliance on top of what's already existing, and certification, traceability tools, third-party verification, these are all significant costs on an annual basis. And without premium price or formal market access, it's very hard. There's no mechanism for smallholders to recover these costs. Scale is not a game that they are able to play compared to multinationals. And the last one being data privacy. The farmers are quite concerned about data ownership, the misuse, as well as what we call digital sovereignty. And we want to encourage ensuring that transparent frameworks that's utilized so that we can ensure ethical data handling. And of course, we say that when unaided compliance becomes exclusion, and the cost here would be a whole generation of rural farmers. Next slide, please. What it could look like, what could inclusion look like? What are some practical solutions? Firstly, what about some open access digital tools? So we had earlier the rep from Indonesia, Ambassador. We had MSPO from Malaysia. And platforms like National Dashboard, the GeoPalm portal, and MSPO Trace help smallholders map the land record yields and also track compliance. And what many Malaysia's mentioned this earlier about being recognized and being interoperable with EU systems so that there's no duplications, there's no digital silos in that sense. Second is maybe group-based and jurisdictional approaches. This can help reduce costs. We pool resources, for example, mapping and audits. And a jurisdictional due diligence where compliance is verified at a district or province level instead of individual can, I think, assist in this as well. Third is simplified compliance support. The Council promotes creation of smallholder-friendly compliance kits. checklists in local languages, visual guides for those who have limited literacy, and also some offline tools for areas that are low connectivity zones. Because this will then function as onboarding tools. It helps bridge the gaps. They're not full substitutes, but they really they speak very strongly to including the smallholders and not actually excluding many millions of them. The fourth, an inclusive pilot program. So we really do encourage EU industries, NGOs to co-invest, perhaps in pilot projects, high-volume smallholder regions like Riau, Sabah, subsidized mapping, compliance testing, and also some inclusivity, traceability models that can be scaled across regions. Because smallholders, what they need is actually shared tools, some support, and a fair shot at compliance, just so they can stay in the game, still feed families and the next generation, and give hope to the many children and next generation that they have. Next slide, please. So some recommendations to wrap up today's presentation. What are some inclusive pathways forward? The recognition of national certification schemes.
If you can wrap up really quickly, Zana, we just want to get to Q&A as well.
Sure. So basically, recognizing national certification schemes, we also encourage supporting capacity building, which is really important, open source monitoring tools, flexible implementation timeline, and also digital inclusion, which is really important in spaces that don't have full literacy. Next slide, please. The key message, deforestation-free must also mean deforestation fair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Izana. Sorry to rush you, and I wish we had more time. You've laid out some really important issues for smallholders, and I expect our next speaker will pick up on some of these as well. We're turning to Vanessa Adams. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Level 4 International, which is a consulting firm that is improving supply chains and also working at the last mile. And Vanessa is going to speak to us briefly today about some of the implications of the EUDR for coffee and cocoa smallholders in Africa.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And to all the previous speakers, this is an incredible lineup and fantastic undertaking. I thought to avoid duplication, I would just highlight a few key points about what's happening in Africa. And I think this has been reflective of what's been spoken to across Africa. Everyone knows there are 54 countries, and the cocoa coffee are the leading export income generation for foreign currency for countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire, of course, as well as Nigeria. And there have been efforts ongoing to digitize across all of these countries in a way that is inclusive, that has safe and validated data, and that causes more economic impact and improvements, not as well as climatic resilience. And I think what I wanted to underscore here are some of the issues that have been encountered on the interoperability question in terms of the complexity of digitizing at the last mile across Africa. In Ethiopia alone, there are more than 5 million smallholder farmers actually involved in the coffee production. The governments of Uganda, for example, have taken a national strategy to digitize and map through polygon mapping, actually plots and farms. But you all know that the complexity of these supply chains is generating huge lakes of data, which are not interoperable, which come at different times and have different standards and different regulations. So I think the granularity of the approach and the risk of market upsets, as was well described by the presentation by IFPRI on China, wherein the market actually drives prices to be significantly more volatile and to designate certain areas as much higher risk in terms of lower impact at smallholder farmer level. There are huge initiatives ongoing for national governments to digitize farmer registrations for many reasons, for input subsidies, as well as for deregulation and mapping of tree farming. But as you may well be knowing that, planting a tree right now in Africa has no actual legal benefit to the farmer. So the farmer doesn't own the land. If you plant the tree and you cultivate that farm, you have historical rights, but you don't actually own those trees. And so we're trying to look at how to use EUDR the other way around. How can EUDR actually benefit the farmers? How can all of this traceability, all the tree mapping, all the farmer-centric focus, not just be a compliance on the import side, but actually drive transparency, increase quality, increase farm gate benefit. And so this is something we've been looking at using different digital technology solutions. How can farmers really benefit from that traceability? What data can actually be highlighted that's already being gathered? What can governments be using this same data for in an integrated fashion and select targeted areas which are more vulnerable populations where actually, as many of you know, climate volatility is already so pervasive, and the areas which are actually producing cocoa and producing coffee, just as examples, are the most at risk with climate change. So everybody has an incentive to solve for long-term climate impact, but this is already impacting farmers' livelihoods and incomes and reducing yields. So I think that we need to take a holistic view. And I also wanted to just reiterate that this is not plantation farming. These are agroforestry zones, as was mentioned earlier. And so increasing yield on a farm actually benefits the tree crops and the food crops as well. And so we probably want to be looking at everything that's growing on these farms, not just looking at is one kind of tree being cut to grow more coffee, cocoa, soy. I thought it'd be interesting to just show a few maps, how this data looks when it's gathered and how complex it is in rural areas to be identifying particular trees, particular plots of land, and tracking every single lot, not just one-time mapping of the forest, but every single lot, every single time for every buyer. And different private sector buyers actually come to the same farms and and can be buying at different times. And so every bag that comes off every farm every time has to be barcoded or QR coded and tracked all the way through multiple processing, multiple handlers. And so I don't think we're at the end of this journey. I think it's the beginning of a journey. We've already seen iterative processes in place. And I thought it was interesting to note that on the farms that were checked in Africa so far, 93% were compliant. I think that's reflected in this, new risk rating measures. But what does that really mean, and how do we deal with it in terms of consumer education, in terms of valuing and incentivizing further planting of trees and afforestation, monitoring for data compliance, and having real usable decision-making quality data, which is regularly updated. Again, I know we're out of time. This is a complex subject, but I want to reiterate that the private sector have been iterating solutions, both in terms of tracking the systems digitally, but also large corporates, food companies have invested heavily in addition to governments, and I think that should be reflected in the policy analytics and in the assessment of how much investment is going into the implementation around the world of these processes. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vanessa. Really excellent points, and some of the specificity here for cocoa and coffee in particular. Really great presentation. Our last speaker is Sandra Durango, who's a postdoctoral fellow with the Alliance of Biodiversity in CIAT, so another CGIAR colleague. Not so much a focus on smallholders, but rather on a system that they are working on essentially to help with the identification of production origin and verification for deforestation. in Colombia, and interesting linking it also to the climate change context. So over to you, Sandra, and if you can be quite brief. I'm sorry that you're the last speaker, but I appreciate you putting down the time for your remarks, just highlighting your key messages.
Don't worry. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to share Colombians' experience. I lead a project on monitoring and traceability in agricultural supply chains in Colombia. Today, I will tell you how we are transforming our agri-food supply chains through a national monitoring, reporting, and verification system for zero deforestation. So let me start with how this began and why it matters for companies. Thank you. Colombia signed the joint declaration of intent with Germany, Norway, and United Kingdom to reduce deforestation and promote sustainable development. Following this commitment, Colombia consolidated the zero deforestation agreements with private sector partners and producers. Building on those agreements, we co-developed a public national MRV protocol that applied across 5 value chains: cocoa, coffee, palm, oil, beef, and dairy. These cross-sector scope matters because companies source through multi-tier mixed networks that require consistent and comparable verification. The MRV protocol enables companies and producers to demonstrate zero deforestation commitments nationally and internationally by working through deforestation-free sourcing networks and standardized transparent verification process. With that policy foundation and multi-sector scope in place, let me show what the MRV protocol includes and how this works in practice. Next slide, please. Yeah. This work is the first step of MRV is about the awareness. Yes, awareness workshops with signatory companies to align on methodology and roles, especially sharing geospatial supply networks data. Next animation, please. Thank you. Next again. Thank you. Step 2 is about the training. Training companies, technicians, and producers on traceability, sustainable practice, and result-based incentives. The step 3 is about the data collection. Next animation. This data collection is offline capture on farm polygons and photo evidence. Next animation. Resolving false alerts in agroforestry, for example, shade management, in the case, for example, of the cocoa agroforestry. Next. And the step 4 is about the integration, the process polygons in Ganabosque's tools and cross with official data, EUDR, vaccination, mobility processing plans, to make direct and indirect suppliers for crops and land use, agricultural frontier, and conservation layers. And the next animation is about the step 5. It's about the reporting, produce compliance reports on the international standards. And the step 6 is about the verification, third-party verification by the Ministry of Environment via the Free Green Business Seal, ensuring public transparency and credibility. Next slide, please. This work is done in close collaboration with EUDR and its national forest and carbon monitoring system, as well as with the Ministry of Environment to ensure official recognition, consistency, and transparency across all sectors. Together, these partnerships make the MRV a cornerstone of Colombia NDC 3.0 and its strategy to achieve deforestation-free sustainable value chain. Next slide. Okay. What about the progress implementation?
Just wrap up very briefly,
Next.
Please, Sandra.
Yes. Next. Today, we are monitoring 60,000 hectares under the MRV system, and this area are about to start the verification phase. This means that producers and companies will soon have official proof of compliance with zero deforestation commitments. Several companies participating in Colombian zero deforestation agreements are already using the system as a part of the international traceability. Next. Next. So how does this connect to the European Union regulation? The MRV system provides exactly what companies need for due diligence under the EUDR about traceability through farm-level georeferenced data, transparency through a public verification platform, risk assessment through national deforestation alert linked to productive activity. And in this way, Colombia is building an official mechanism that support both our national climate goals and international market requirements. And the next, to conclude, this is more than a monitoring tool. It is a collaborative effort that connects producers, companies, and institutions to protect forests while maintaining productive livelihoods. We see the MRV as a model that can inspire other countries and serve as a brief for cooperation with the European Union. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for that overview of the initiative in Colombia, which is also, I think, linked to the nationally determined contribution of Colombia. That is the goal there as well in terms of providing an additional incentive. So we have a little bit of time now left for Q&A. And there's a question here about, there's actually a few questions, I think, particularly about Brazil. So maybe Valeria and our European colleagues could come in on that. Brazilian expansion of soy in rainforest regions has not occurred on areas recently deforested, but on degraded pasture land. And that's been happening for many years. So is this actually a success because it helped, that planting the soy there actually is protecting native vegetation, or is it a problem? So maybe Valeria, you can come in on that, and maybe Lisa, that's also a question for you.
Sure. Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you for the question. I think that in the case of Brazil, there are two things to bring up or to highlight. The first one is that they've been working a lot in multi-cropping or intensification, so they can increase production without having to really increase the land use for that. So that is something that we're also trying to be able to measure and to capture a little bit better. And this is also part of the current work that we're doing with EMBRAPAN, with the Minister of Agriculture. And then the second one, they have a very nice program, and they've been emphasizing this year quite a lot. And it's about degradation land and how to improve that. And I think that goes into also part of the question. So I think that it's just a matter of looking really at the numbers, but they've been doing, they are aware of the issue, and they've been implementing some new solutions or figuring out how to deal with that. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Lisa, maybe if you want to take a crack at that as well. I suppose it must relate to your ban on your deforestation, by what date it needs to be. So I assume if something is grown on degraded pasture land, if it was done prior to your baseline, it's acceptable, or is that not the correct way to think about that?
Yes, I mean the cutoff date is I have to look it up, but yeah, if it's grown before the cutoff date, it's okay. But if it's grown afterwards, then it's prone to deforestation, and then it's not okay.
Okay, it's 31st December 2020.
Yeah, so obviously, yeah, this is the compromise. It was Rainforest Alliance had another cutoff date, but that was a compromise on the political level.
Okay, very good. Kevin, there is a question, and the other question that pertains, I think, to Brazil, but maybe not only to Brazil, is this question of if the EUDR when it is implemented, what is the risk of trade diversion of products that would not pass muster under the EUDR, but coming to other markets? And you mentioned that China is aware of this. So what is the plan to cope with that?
Yeah, the risk of diversions seem to be very high if the EUDR is in place, right? So the European will source from the less risk area, and that means if China does not do anything, so they will push the China to source the soybean from certainly more from the deforested areas. And it will also increase the overall cost, of course, because it will push further to the north side in the way. And in terms of how to cope with that, as I outlined in the presentation, and China certainly already started to work on type like volunteer type of base, the zero deforestation certification, traceability, and so on. So essentially, that means it's important for the big importers to coordinate in the way and make sure that the part, well, it's really the substitution effect or diversion is minimal. That's probably the most important thing.
Great. Vanessa, do you want to come in on whether you see a risk of diversion also for coffee and cocoa?
Yeah, I just thought it would be interesting to note that even the trade uncertainty is causing buyers to reduce their purchasing of coffee and cocoa into Europe already, and that was noted last year in trade volumes. And so as long as this uncertainty, which was mentioned about how the implementation is going to occur, what are the penalties of implementation in terms of non-compliance, or just the, again, trade uncertainty means that there are more suppliers of coffee and cocoa selling to non-European destinations like the Middle East, like China, as well as other countries, which are third-party processors and packagers of products. And that's happened over the last couple of years through this process. So I think it's a risk and a cost to consumers and a risk to farmers of actually getting reduced prices. Thanks.
Thank you. Simon, maybe I can direct this question to you. If there is in fact this 1-year delay, which has not yet been determined, it's been proposed, what do you foresee happening within that additional year to perhaps address some of the concerns that some of the speakers have made here, with regard to smallholders?
Yes, so the challenges of trade diversion away from countries that are being considered as high risk for deforestation linked to the commodities in question is definitely real. It's also something that we hear from when we talk to certain companies and importers. And this is exactly what we are trying to tackle. So we are with the Team Europe initiative, we are trying to put the focus on producing countries, for example, on coffee that are based on smallholder production. So, for example, in Ethiopia, there are up to 5 million smallholders that produce coffee. Although you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, because, for example, Ethiopia produces around 50% of its coffee for domestic production, and maybe around 20 to 30% of producers are actually linked up to the EU market directly. So we are focusing at the moment our efforts on smallholder farmers that are already linked up to the EU market, but then thinking beyond the entry into application, the focus will shift maybe more towards including sections of the production that are not yet linked up to the EU market by promoting traceability systems and actually linking up those smallholders with the EU market. So we're also active in smaller producing countries such as Burundi, Malawi, for coffee or for cocoa, Liberia, Sierra Leone, which are basically trying to expand their production, and where there are deforestation risks, which doesn't put them in a favorable position to be able to attract buyers and actually deliver their produce to the EU market. So we're working on that in a more long-term fashion as well, and not just on mere compliance issues.
Great. Thanks, Simon. If the ambassador is still with us, I wanted to ask you, since you are based in Brussels and the European Commission is very, very active, of course, on trade, I understand that Indonesia has recently concluded a quite ambitious trade agreement with the EU. Could you just give us a flavor of how the EUDR and that new trade agreement maybe intersect, and maybe just to get your comments more generally on trade at this point in time, right? We have a lot of things happening on the trade front. There's not just the EUDR, there's also the carbon tax adjustment mechanism that is supposed to come into place, and of course we have, on this side of the Atlantic, a lot of action on trade, and now also we're seeing quite a bit of counter tariffs that are being imposed around the world. So maybe just your reflections on all of this. It's a big question, but would love to hear from you, given your very important role there in Brussels.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. As you might be aware that we have already agreed in 23rd of September with EU on the issue of the trade agreement. We negotiated it in more than 9 years. So I think this is very game changer both for EU and Indonesia, and then it is a very important trade agreement. It's a very modern trade agreement with digital economy and then sustainability also there, because in this CEPA include a framework to foster sustainability growth and development with an enforceable commitment on labor and environment. And then also as a parties to Paris Agreement, we reiterate our commitment to address climate crisis under CEPA. So we also open avenue for dialogue and collaboration in relation to environmental issue. And then especially on the palm oil, an important commodity in our bilateral trade, we understand that their concern of its sustainability. That is why the protocol on palm oil under EU CEPA is crucial to address the matter. So in short, our CEPA, EU and Indonesia CEPA, will not undermine the effort toward sustainability, but provide an instrument for working together to achieve our common goal. We strongly believe that the trade, I mean the future trade, is based on the sustainability. That's why I always advise our producer, small farmer, and multinational companies, and the importance of the sustainability is not because of the EUDR. It's our future. That's very important. When we signed MOU on the flag tea with EU for our wood, there is many complaints from the wood industry, and then told my president, please, President Jokowi, please, withdraw from that kind of the MOU because it really costs us a lot. But my president said that no, please make sure that the MOU, the signed MOU with EU is not only for the trade, but to save our forests from the illegal logging and everything. That's why we are very happy to sign the CEPA, and then definitely, I mean, EU is put a very high standard on the sustainability in CEPA. That's why this is the most difficult part when we talk about the sustainability, growth, climate change under the CEPA. So this is a very good deal, and really concentrate also on the issue of the sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So we're past time, so I will just make a few very brief concluding remarks. And I think the Ambassador has just really said it, right? I mean, sustainability is a huge priority for the globe at this point in time. So it's not something that is only being pushed through the EUDR, but we all are paying attention to it. So it's hugely important. It will come through legislation, but it will also come through private sector initiatives and voluntary standards. However, it doesn't mean that it's going to be always very easy. And so there are significant hurdles, in particular for smallholders. There are things to be sorted out when it comes to national frameworks and compatibility with some of the EUDR provisions. The delay in the regulation, if it happens, is seen by some as a setback and by some as an opportunity. So certainly it seems there can be additional work done to clarify some aspects of the EUDR and make it perhaps easier for smallholders to comply with that. And I think one of the speakers raised the very, very important question of incentives. We know, of course, that there are costs associated with becoming more sustainable. And so farmers do need an economic incentive to be able to do that. So I think that is a very important thing to bear in mind. And then just in closing, you know, the point I made earlier about the trade arena more generally these days, there's so much happening. And so these issues have touched on sustainability, but of course now we also have a whole trade discussion underway that is about reducing trade deficits and coming to a more fair trading regime. So I think we're in for an interesting next year because on the trade front, there are just so many big developments that are taking place. So I would like to thank all of our speakers very, very much, speakers from the EU, speakers from all over the world that have joined us today to look at this very important regulation. And I think for the very candid and open discussion of everybody shares the ambition on curbing deforestation, but the devil is, of course, always in the detail, but also the tremendous commitment by all players to work together and make this work so that it's really working in practice, not just as a legislative framework. Many thanks to all of our speakers, to our audience, and we look forward to seeing you at another IFPRI seminar very soon. There will be one actually on Friday, where we're looking at extreme poverty and financing food systems in Africa. Many thanks to all of you. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you may be joining us from.